You aimed the hose directly into the entrance and held it there, watching gallon after gallon disappear into the ground, confident that no living thing that small could possibly withstand that kind of sustained, direct assault. And for a moment, it looked like it was working. The entrance went quiet. No ants visible anywhere on the surface. Then, the following morning, they're back, moving in and out of the same general area as though the flood never happened at all, sometimes with barely a pause in their normal foraging routine. What you didn't see, because it was all happening several feet beneath your lawn, was a coordinated survival response involving physical properties of the ants' own bodies that most people have never heard of, an entire secondary nest system many colonies maintain specifically as backup infrastructure, and a level of underwater endurance that would be genuinely difficult to believe if it weren't so thoroughly documented by researchers who've studied it directly. Today, we're going to look at exactly how an ant colony survives something that looks, from the surface, like a completely overwhelming and decisive attack, and why the biology working against your garden hose goes considerably deeper than simple tunnel drainage. The first line of defense against flooding isn't behavioral at all. It's physical, built directly into the surface of every individual ant's body, and it begins working the instant water makes contact, well before any coordinated colony response even has time to organize. An ant's exoskeleton is coated in a thin layer of waxy compounds called cuticular hydrocarbons, the same general class of chemical compounds discussed in earlier videos on this channel in the context of colony scent recognition, but serving an entirely different, additional function here. This waxy coating is naturally hydrophobic, meaning it actively repels water rather than absorbing it, causing water to bead and roll off the body surface in a manner similar to water beading on a freshly waxed car, rather than soaking into and weighing down the exoskeleton the way it would with an unprotected surface. Researchers studying insect cuticle structure under high magnification have documented that this hydrophobic effect is often enhanced further by microscopic surface textures on the exoskeleton itself, tiny ridges and hair-like structures that trap a thin layer of air directly against the body, a phenomenon closely related to the same physical principle that allows certain water-repellent plant leaves, like a lotus leaf, to shed water almost instantly. For an individual ant caught directly in flowing water, this combination of waxy coating and trapped air layer provides genuine, immediate buoyancy and water resistance, reducing the effective weight and drag water would otherwise impose, and giving even a single isolated worker meaningfully better odds of surviving direct water contact than her smooth, uncoated appearance might suggest. Beyond simple water resistance, ants possess a specific physiological capability that allows many species to survive genuine, if temporary, submersion, a capability directly tied to how insects breathe in general and how that system interacts with the hydrophobic surface properties covered above. Ants, like all insects, breathe through a network of small external openings called spiracles, connected to an internal system of tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to tissues throughout the body, an entirely different respiratory system from the lungs mammals rely on. When an ant becomes submerged, the same hydrophobic properties and trapped air layer discussed in the previous section can maintain a thin film of air directly around the body, critically, around the spiracle openings themselves, allowing the ant to continue accessing a small but genuinely usable reserve of oxygen even while fully underwater, a phenomenon researchers studying aquatic and semi-aquatic insects refer to as a plastron, essentially a temporary, physically maintained air supply clinging to the body's surface. This effect, combined with insects' generally low metabolic oxygen compared to similarly sized mammals, allows many ant species to survive full submersion for genuinely extended periods, with some researchers documenting individual ants of certain species surviving continuous submersion for periods from several hours up to, in specific studied cases, well over a day, considerably longer than most people would ever assume possible for such a small creature with no specialized aquatic adaptations in the way a genuinely aquatic insect would possess. This single physiological detail alone explains why a homeowner's hose treatment, however thorough it feels in the moment, is rarely delivering anything close to a lethal outcome for the majority of workers directly exposed to the water. Here is the detail that most fundamentally explains why an entire colony can appear completely unaffected the day after a thorough flooding attempt, and it goes beyond anything happening within the single nest structure itself. Many ant species don't actually rely on a single, centralized nest at all. Researchers studying colony structure across numerous ant species have documented a behavior called paleidomy, in which a single ant colony, genetically one unified society sharing common workers, brood-rearing responsibilities, and often multiple queens depending on species, maintains and actively uses several physically separate nest sites simultaneously, connected not by underground tunnels but by established surface trails along which workers, food, and even regularly transported between locations. In species that display this behavior, what looks to a homeowner isolated mound in one specific corner of a lawn may represent only one satellite location within a considerably larger, distributed colony network, with additional nest sites located elsewhere in the same yard, in a neighboring property, or along a nearby tree line or garden bed, each maintaining its own portion of the overall worker population, and in many documented cases, its own portion of the colony's brood, and even additional queens. For a colony organized this way, flooding a single nest site, even if that genuinely severe enough to eliminate every ant present at that specific location, would represent a loss of only one node within a considerably larger network, with the remaining satellite nests continuing to function in an entirely normalies, capable of repopulating the flooded site through normal worker movement along existing surface trails within a remarkably short period once the flooded location dries out and becomes usable again. This single structural detail, largely invisible from surface observation of any single mound, explains why colony-wide impact from a single localized flooding attempt is often considerably more limited than a homeowner would reasonably expect, even setting aside the individual physiological survival mechanisms covered in the previous two sections. Beyond the passive physical properties covered so far, there's an active, coordinated behavioral response that begins the moment flooding is detected, one that researchers studying colony emergency behavior have documented occurring within a genuinely rapid time frame relative to how quickly a typical hose treatment is applied and completed. As covered in a previous video on this channel discussing rainfall resilience, worker ants respond to water intrusion by rapidly relocating brood toward higher or more distant chambers, using rapid, efficient movement patterns refined specifically for exactly this kind of emergency. What's particularly notable in the context of a sudden, intense hose-based flooding attempt specifically is how quickly this response can be initiated, with researchers documenting measurable evacuation behavior beginning within minutes of water detection in laboratory flooding simulations, a response time considerably faster than the total duration most homeowners spend actually running a hose into a single mound entrance. This means that by the time a multi-minute treatment concludes, a meaningful portion of the colony's most vulnerable and valuable members, the queen if present at that specific nest site, along with developing brood, may have already been relocated to drier, more protected chambers, or in polygamous colonies discussed above, physically evacuated toward an entirely separate satellite nest site via established surface trails, well before the flooding ever reached a volume or duration capable of threatening them directly. It's worth being fully honest and precise here. This doesn't mean flooding has zero effect on a colony at all. Genuine, prolonged flooding, considerably beyond what a single hose treatment typically delivers, can and does kill individual ants, particularly less mobile brood caught in chambers that weren't evacuated in time, and can cause real, temporary disruption to a colony's normal activity and structure. The specific combination of throughout this video, individual water-resistant physiology, extended underwater capability for those directly caught in the water, rapid coordinated evacuation behavior, a distributed multi-location colony structure that isn't single nest site surviving intact, means that the threshold required in an entire colony's survival is considerably higher than most assume, and considerably garden hose applied for is typically capable of reaching, particularly against an established that had developed the full architectural and behavioral resilience, both in this video and in the earlier video uncovering rainfall adapted nest design. Understanding these survival mechanisms doesn't mean every ant colony deserves to be left entirely alone regardless of circumstances, but it does mean the specific expectation that a hose alone will produce a decisive, lasting result is, based on the biology covered throughout this video, unlikely to match reality for most established colonies. If you're dealing with a colony in a genuinely low concern of your yard, away from structures or areas of frequent activity, the ecological benefits discussed in earlier videos on this channel, soil aeration, pest predation, and in some cases, seed dispersal, likely outweigh whatever minor inconvenience a visible mound represents, particularly once you understand that a hose treatment aimed at removing it is unlikely to succeed regardless of effort invested. If a colony genuinely does require intervention due to structural concerns or frequently used areas, the same guidance covered in the previous two videos applies directly here as well. Bait-based treatments that rely on workers distributing a substance throughout the colony's food-sharing network remain considerably more effective than any physical or water-based method, precisely because they work with the colony's own internal distribution behavior rather than attempting to overwhelm defenses that, as covered throughout this video, are considerably more resilient than they appear from the surface. If you're currently facing a mound you were planning to flood, here's a more realistic path forward. Step 1. Reconsider whether flooding is worth attempting at all, given the biology covered in this video. In the majority of cases involving an established, mature colony, the time and water invested are unlikely to produce a meaningfully different outcome than simply leaving the colony alone entirely. Step 2. If the mound is a genuine concern due to location, use bait-based treatment rather than water. This approach specifically leverages the colony's own food-sharing behavior to reach the queen and brood across the colony's full structure, including any satellite nest sites a polygamous colony might maintain, addressing the underlying population rather than attempting a single, localized physical assault. Step 3. For colonies near structures or high-traffic areas causing genuine structural concern, consult a pest control professional who can assess whether the colony displays a single nest or multi-nest structure and apply treatment accordingly, since, as covered above, a colony's actual footprint may extend considerably beyond the single visible mound you're aware of. Step 4. If you're simply curious about the colony's structure rather than trying to eliminate it, consider observing rather than intervening. Watching worker activity along established trails leading away from a visible mound can sometimes reveal whether a colony is maintaining additional nest sites nearby, offering a genuinely interesting window into exactly the kind of distributed colony structure discussed throughout this video. What looks, from the surface, like a single vulnerable mound facing the overwhelmings of a garden hose is, in reality, frequently the reflection of a considerably larger, more resilient system. Individual ants coated in water-repellent wax and trapping their own temporary air supply, a coordinated evacuation response capable of relocating the colony's most vulnerable members of detecting the threat, and in many species an entire secondary network of satellite nests spread across a footprint most homeowners suspect exists beyond the single mound they can actually see. None of this means ant colonies are entirely indestructible or that intervention is never warranted, but it does mean that the specific expectation many people into a garden hose, that raw water volume alone should be able to overwhelm and eliminate a colony through sheer force, consistently underestimates just how many layers of physical, physiological, and structural resilience a mature ant colony has built over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, specifically to survive exactly this kind of threat. Have you ever tried to flood out an ant colony with a hose, only to find them back the very next day? Now that you know why, does it change how you'll approach it next time? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes your stories become the subject of the next video. And if you've ever wondered what another small creature quietly living in your yard actually knows about your world, I think the next video might surprise you just as much as this one did. Until then, keep watching, keep wondering, and never stop paying attention to the small things.